Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be discussing the gluten-free diet. So I've already reviewed a few other diets on this channel. I'll link them down below, but I've reviewed the keto diet, I've reviewed Optavia, I've reviewed the Herbalized smoothie shops, and I have a huge passion for debunking these diets and talking about why they're not always the greatest fits for people. And so if there's any other diets that you're wondering about, let me know in the comments below what you want to see. But today is all about gluten. We're going to talk about what gluten is, where it's found in food, and who all needs to be eating a gluten-free diet. So let's get right into it. Also, I'm recording outside today just to mix it up a little bit. I hope it's not too loud for you guys. We'll see in the end if it's just too bad. So first off, I want to define what gluten actually is. So gluten is actually a protein. People often think that it is a carb because it is found in many carb-rich foods like bread and pasta. But gluten is actually a protein. It's often found in wheat, barley, and rye, and it is what's responsible for that elasticity of dough. That is why you may notice that many gluten-free products are kind of crumbly because they don't have gluten that makes it elastic anymore. So gluten definitely can cause intestinal damage for some people. But if you do notice that when you eat gluten, you do have, upset stomach, bloating, diarrhea or constipation, that sort of thing, don't automatically just get rid of gluten and see what happens. I highly recommend working with a healthcare team, including a registered dietitian, if you do have any kind of GI distress, because GI distress can be caused by so many things besides just a gluten intolerance or celiac disease. Things like stress, your environment, other types of foods can all play a role on how your GI system is operating. And if you self-diagnose and just tell yourself that you're gluten intolerant and stop eating it, you may be missing out on a lot of good foods for no reason. So we'll get into celiac disease and the difference between that and a gluten sensitivity in a minute. But first I want to talk more about what gluten-free actually is and how you can kind of look for it in the stores. So the FDA does have rules on when a food can call themselves gluten-free, free of gluten. It can say on the label without gluten or no gluten, and those are all signs that the FDA has verified that that food has less than 20 parts per million of gluten in that product. So if you do have to avoid gluten for whatever reason, those are kind of the key words you can look for to make sure you are not getting gluten in your food, because if you are gluten sensitive, you obviously don't want to be having gluten. Okay, real quick. Since I do talk a lot about weight loss on my channel, I want to make it very clear that going gluten-free will not lead to weight loss. A gluten-free diet alone is not going to be successful long-term for weight loss. There is no evidence to support a gluten-free diet for weight loss, and any evidence that you may see or have heard is all anecdotal, usually in the media by celebrities or influencers or whoever else, but it's just not true that eliminating gluten from your diet is going to lead to weight loss. The only way that going gluten-free would lead to weight loss is because you're getting rid of a large chunk of foods. Many foods that people often eat on a daily basis have gluten in them. Again, like bread and pasta, cereal, pizza, for example. So if you're getting rid of all of those different foods because you think that going gluten-free is going to help you, then you might lose weight because you're just getting rid of a bunch of different foods that you're usually eating. And as we know, the only way weight loss can occur is if we're in a caloric deficit, and by getting rid of those foods, you may or may not be in a caloric deficit. Another way that being gluten-free may lead to weight loss is it may just be making you be more cognizant of food labels. You might be reading food labels more and noticing how many calories are in everything, how much protein's in there, carbs and fat as well. Those might play a role in your decisions. But again, I can't stress enough that just getting rid of gluten is not going to cause weight loss. It's kind of just the side effects that come along with going gluten-free that might lead to weight loss for some people. If you are going gluten-free just because you think that it's healthy or the right thing to do and you don't really need to be, you're probably wasting a lot of money because often gluten-free alternatives to many foods are very expensive. And again, you're probably missing out on a lot of good foods. If you love pizza and then you cut it out because you feel like you have to not eat gluten anymore, that kind of stinks. So bottom line, gluten-free does not equal healthy. It does not equal weight loss. Gluten-free is mostly just appropriate for those who need to be gluten-free. Okay, now I want to get to who actually does need to go gluten-free. So there are two populations of people who should not be eating gluten. The only people who should be actually avoiding gluten are those who have a gluten intolerance or those who have celiac disease. So the gluten-free diet was actually created to treat celiac disease. Those are the main people who should not be eating gluten, because when someone who has celiac disease does eat gluten, this triggers an immune response, and this damages the lining of the small intestine. I actually have an entire podcast episode where a good friend of mine and a fellow dietitian who has celiac disease talks all about her experience, what to expect if you have this disease, how to get diagnosed. She goes all into that. She really deep dives, and so I'll include that below. So I can only touch on this. I don't have celiac disease, and I also don't work in GI. So I know what I know, but if you really want to hear firsthand from someone who has celiac, I recommend giving that episode a listen. In order to know if you have celiac disease, you need to be diagnosed, and this is done with a blood test, and then a biopsy of the small intestine is done to then confirm the diagnosis. So you can't just walk into a doctor's office and then leave knowing you have celiac. It often requires a bunch of different testing to confirm the diagnosis. And then on the other side of the spectrum is a gluten sensitivity. This is not an autoimmune disease like celiac disease is. It is also not an allergy, so you can also be allergic to wheat, which does often contain gluten. But if you test negative for a wheat allergy and you test negative for celiac, you might be diagnosed with a gluten intolerance. And this can range in severity. People have very different symptoms if they are gluten intolerant. The most common ones, I would say, are most likely GI effects. But the treatment, of course, is a gluten elimination diet. So how do you know if you should go gluten-free? How do you know if you have celiac or if you have a gluten intolerance or even a wheat allergy? You really need to work with a healthcare team, including your doctor and a registered dietitian. The doctor will help to diagnose what exactly is going on, and the dietitian can help you navigate this new disease or intolerance or allergy. I've heard crazy stories of dentists and chiropractors and holistic nutritionists telling their patients and clients to go gluten-free to help with a whole myriad of symptoms. And while gluten can trigger many different things, including anxiety, inflammation, it is very important that you don't just cut out gluten without the help and the diagnosis of an actual medical doctor, and then using a dietitian to help you navigate that process. I want to list off a few symptoms that you might have that may be a trigger for you to go get checked out and see if you do have any kind of gluten intolerance. If you suffer frequently from diarrhea, constipation, heartburn, brain fog, stomach aches after eating, fatigue, skin issues like eczema and psoriasis, I recommend going to see your doctor to see if it is related to gluten or something else. Don't just cut out gluten without double checking first. Because like I said earlier, that would stink if you were able to eat gluten, but you weren't because you thought you were gluten intolerant. I mean, if you have the tools that you need to go gluten-free and you just feel better not eating it, go for it. That's fine. I just know that I would be pretty upset if I somehow found out that I wasn't actually gluten intolerant and I've been missing out on all those gluten-rich foods for however long it may have been. So, two more things I want to point out. As a dietitian, I have to mention what happens if you do get rid of gluten in your diet, the nutrients that you might be missing out on. So, breads and cereals that are gluten-containing are often fortified with B vitamins. And if we cut those out, we may be missing out on some very important nutrients. One important one especially is going to be folate. Folate is very important for women who are pregnant or plan to become pregnant. And you can definitely supplement with folate. But if you cut those out, just be sure to kind of compensate for those in some other way. And then one more thing that may become worrisome if you don't have gluten is you're cutting out a lot of fibrous foods. So again, that bread, that cereal, that pasta, those are all usually pretty fiber rich if you are choosing whole grain options. So if you do cut out gluten, do be sure to still have plenty of fruits and vegetables and things like beans and rice. That way you still are sure to get in plenty of that fiber. Wheat, barley, and rye are the big ones that have gluten in them, so you can still have options like brown rice, quinoa, buckwheat. If you do get oatmeal, make sure it does say it's gluten-free on the label. Some of them will have traces of gluten in them. but you can often have oatmeal as well. So bottom line is, don't just cut gluten out of your diet for weight loss or inflammation or any other symptom or goal or effect that you're hoping to get from it, because it may or may not be beneficial. Always work with a healthcare team, including a dietitian, to make sure that you actually do need to be going gluten-free. If you aren't gluten intolerant or have celiac or a wheat allergy, eat your darn gluten. It is so delicious. It does not cause any harm. It's not going to lead to weight gain. It is absolutely appropriate and allowed in a balanced diet. Alright guys, let me know if you enjoyed this diet review. I will definitely keep making these. There are so many diets out there. I don't think I'll ever have a hard time thinking of new ones to do. Let me know if you have any questions about the gluten-free diet or any comments about things I may have missed, and I will see you guys next week. Bye!